Well, hello, everybody. Today we have with us the CEO of the United Way of Greater Cincinnati, Moira Weir. Moira, thanks for giving us a few minutes to talk.
Well, thank you, Judge, for having me here today. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you, and I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Well, as we've spoken to so many people, we've got some great organizations in this community that have been here for a long, long time. And United Way is surely one of those leading organizations. Maybe give us an update on what really is United Way today here in 2020.
Yeah, United Way has it's a unique history. We have been in the community for over 100 years. We touch 10 counties, so we're, across the river and here. We are really, what I love about the mission is that we try to mobilize people to collectively come together to address really, difficult community problems. And for us in this region, poverty continues to be something that we're all struggling with. And so I look at us as a sort of like a neutral broker and a convener, which is probably one of our greatest assets because we can bring folks together. For instance, the provider community in terms of how are we serving individuals. And then we learn from that. That helps us then drive policy. So we can go to our policymakers and government and ask them to think about the laws perhaps or the systems that are preventing our families from moving forward. So we do a lot of work around advocacy and policy work. And then having the opportunity to talk to people in the community about the need, both to join as a volunteer or to be a donor. But I think, volunteerism and advocacy leads to wanting to donate. And then I think if you think about how we bring all these wonderful people together and mobilize around a shared vision, I think that's where the United Way has such impact. And then we also raise issues to the community about what's really happening. I have often found in my career, and I'm sure you see the same thing, people don't always know what's happening in their neighborhood. And it's our responsibility, I think, to really educate people. And I would say the last thing that I have learned through my career is people want to help and they really want to be involved, and people are incredibly generous. And I would say even people that you think couldn't possibly be generous, they are generous because they want to help their community. And I think that's what's really where we can help elevate those conversations.
That's a huge point. Well, a lot of great people in Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky for sure.
Yes.
Doing a lot of great work. In this 100-year legacy, one of the key factors is raising dollars that the campaigns annually, correct? As a community, we all come together and pull these resources to do what you're talking about earlier. The campaign typically on an average annual basis, how much is collected by United Way in our region?
So the total campaign last year was a little bit over $50 million. This year, we're hoping to do the same thing. We actually started early because we knew that the needs were so great in the community. And we wanted to make sure that we gave, we also have to have humility as we do a campaign because certainly many of us have friends or colleagues that have been impacted by this. So we really want to be careful as we not only ask people to participate, but also recognize that everybody's struggling. So we wanted to give people, more runway, so to speak, and have the opportunity for companies to pick and choose when they thought it was a good time to jump in. And we also are trying something different this year. We're doing more digital marketing. This new world has forced us to really be creative. And so we're trying to impact people in different ways and touching them, just to elevate the conversation about what's happening in the community.
That's a great point. It's been interesting talking to a lot of organizations that when the pandemic hit and you came in this role just literally a few days after really right when everything was totally seemingly coming unraveled in our community, and you came in as CEO there. The way that United Way stepped in to help coordinate the efforts, maybe you could speak to that and what you saw really mid to late March and how that's evolved right now with United Way's involvement in the pandemic.
You raised a really excellent point. So I came from working in the public sector and worked really my whole career has been working with families that are, in poverty. And I knew, like many of us, what was a health crisis quickly became an economic crisis for our families overnight. And if you think back to in March, particularly with restaurant, many of the families we help are working in restaurants, they're working hourly jobs. And so think of yourself as a mother who went to work, like myself, on a Sunday and found out the restaurants were closing. Well, I was counting on those tips and those wages to really help pay for my childcare and my food. Well, we knew people were going to be hurting that night, or the next day. And we wanted to make sure we could collectively come together to raise money. So we joined arm in arm with many wonderful funders. We raised over $7.3 million for our region. And the other really critical part about that is we deployed those resources 100% back into the community over a 3-month time period. So if you think about that, the community heard the need and the community responded. And it was really wonderful. And we were also very intentional in terms of how we distributed those dollars. We wanted to make sure that we were touching the whole region. But we also want to make sure that we were looking really intentionally about the pockets where we saw high poverty rates, and also recognize that when people are stressed, they go to someone that they trust. So it could be their church. It could be a small nonprofit in their neighborhood. So we really wanted to be inclusive in terms of who all we brought to the table to hear what the community needed, and then we distribute those dollars.
And so speak to that point about what are those dollars primarily when in that $7 million investment, I would call it, back into the community. Was it food? Was it rent assistance? Where were those primary pockets?
So you hit the two top ones. So
okay.
we listened well. We listened again to the community, and we know just from past history. But to your point and your understanding, we knew housing is, stable housing was going to be critical. We need food and security. We also know senior services were really, seniors were feeling very isolated and needed help. And we knew childcare was going to be a big issue. So I would say those were our big first buckets that we heard a lot. And then as other things propped up, we wanted to be responsive. So certainly, the shelters were, as we were helping the shelters go from congregate living to looking for hotels. And then sadly, we saw an increase in domestic violence. So we were thinking through how can we do some interventions in that regard. And I would say what I would like, to continue to hone in on is that we really want to be intentional in terms of really listening to the community and making sure that families and individuals are driving our response and that we are doing what they believe is right. I've, through my career, we often want to tell families what we think is right, but I've learned there's no better way to get buy-in unless you let them be the driver and have them really tell us and us develop responses and services around their needs.
That's a great point. And I guess that, as we come through this pandemic and we're not obviously anywhere near finished with it, the impacts to the community on all the areas, are things different today than they were in April to you? And if so, what's the difference today that you're now seeing?
So sadly, I think, if you look in our region, we already knew families were struggling. I remind people that are on public support, so let's say people that are receiving food stamps, most of those people are working 2 or 3 jobs. And what we know happened is similar to what happened to the Great Recession, is that families were, set back again, and they've lost that ground. So that safety net wasn't as sturdy as we had hoped. So I think what's really important is, and this is where I think United Way will be really helpful in terms of policy and advocacy, is that we need to build a safety net that's stronger. And what from my experience, and I'm sure your experience, families want to take care of themselves and they want to take care of their children or their loved ones. We just have to provide the supports for them to do that and let them drive that. And, I've often found in this arena, when you talk about poverty, you might talk to an individual and they're like, well, I'm not poor. Well, that they're living in the federal poverty, but they don't believe it. And that's fine. So what my response is, well, how can we help you, whatever you need good for your family, and then let the family drive it. So I think what worries me is that we know that this has hit the families that we're dedicating to serving, which are low-income families. And so how can we help really provide them supports now in terms of our response, but then also start to build an infrastructure through the nonprofit sector and also through policymaking that really will be a strength to these families and really help them thrive. So part of our work will be not only responding today, but also what does restoration look like and rebuilding for the nonprofit sector and our families and our vulnerable communities in terms of how we can help them.
That's a great point. Well, and it seems as though one thing that you can speak to this a bit, and we can wrap up in a second, but is the issue of United Way really helps to pull people and organizations together as opposed to as opposed to replacing or duplicating the efforts of other organizations. Would that be a fair statement?
Yeah, that's thank you for bringing that up, because, honestly, that I think is another one of our benefits, is that we can look, I look at donor dollars as precious resources. And so how do we want to be strategic collectively, all coming together? I always say there's no competition in poverty. So how do we come together and build on each other's strengths as organizations and deploy those resources in a very strategic way?
That's
so
great.
We might have somebody who's really good at food security. Well, let's support that. And this person's really good at domestic violence. Let's support that, but really be intentional in terms of how do we deploy those resources. And I would say the last thing is, coming together in a united way, I think is what we need as a community. And how do we, come together in a united fashion and really address and support our community and our families.
Well, I think it's well said. And if there's any one takeaway, you've now been in this role for, I guess, what is it, 6 months or so? But you've had a lifetime of dealing with the population and the organization, really the needs of the community. Is there a takeaway that you'd offer now as kind of being a newbie at United Way? If you were letting the rest of us know who aren't working there on a daily basis that you'd like to share something you've learned?
Yes, I would say we are the new modern day United Way. And that means that we are encouraging, we want everyone to get involved. So whether you want to be an advocate or a volunteer, get to know your community, because be involved, and that spurs passion, and it spurs a connection to our families and understand the struggles of our families. And I think at the end of the day, it gives all of us hope, and that we all need hope about the future.
Well, I appreciate all your work and for the region. And Lord knows you've had a lifetime of your career has been serving the community and being selfless about it. So we appreciate your continued service, and thanks for giving me some of your time today.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.